Really, what this talk is going to focus on is effective DOM selector patterns, and why we want to consider how we are actually interacting with our application and how DOM selector patterns really inform how that interaction takes place. Because if you think about Cypress and think about really any testing tool, when you're selecting an item off of the page, you're interacting with that app. So are you interacting with it like a computer or like a user? Because both of them, we have two different use cases here where we really want to be interacting like a user does, since that's who uses our application. So I'm going to do a quick little introduction, and let me actually get my mouse to the right thing so I can control the slides. Okay. I'm going to do a quick little introduction here. So I'm Carter Capocacci. I'm the father of three. I've been married now for a little over 5 years. So if you guys see my wife around, her name is Raquel Capocacci. Tell her thank you for putting up with it all. I am from Memphis, Tennessee. I'm a JavaScript developer. I'm a cyclist and a runner. Although I used to do that a lot more often. So any words of encouragement for me to actually get back on the bike and get my running shoes back on this winter, I'd really appreciate it. I'm also a DIYer. So if I'm not writing code, I have a 3D printer where I'll print up stuff from my home, or I'll be, fixing a garage door, or doing things like that. I think there's a big overlap between people who like to build things on computers and like to build things in real life. My socials over there on the left-hand side, so you can reach me at capocacci.dev. There's my LinkedIn, and there's my Twitter as well. The really good thing about having a unique last name is I basically get to take that handle wherever I can find it. So except for in capocacci.com, it's actually owned by a restaurant in Canada. And if anybody is in Canada and knows where that restaurant is, and they have T-shirts or something, let me know. I'll pay for it, and I'll send you a little finder's fee for sending me a T-shirt from Capocacci, the restaurant. Okay, so on the agenda today, we're going to talk about one, interacting like a user. I'm going to give an example statement. It's just a little bit of pseudocode. This isn't a really code-heavy presentation. It's pretty light today. And I'm going to talk about why this example statement can actually result in some false confidence. Then I'm going to talk about some rankings. And by rankings, these are my rankings. These aren't the definitive rankings. These aren't a solution for your problems. These basically are not a roadmap to success. But these are what I have found to be the most beneficial patterns. And actually, I forgot something right there at the intro. Let me hop back just a slide. So I don't know if you could see it on my shirt here, but I work at Hilton. I am the senior manager of quality automation for Hilton Hotels. And before I move any further, Hilton does not actually endorse any software products. So we're going to talk about those rankings. And again, those rankings are not a roadmap to success. They are what I have found to be the most viable, the most maintainable way to manage your test automation, especially your selector patterns. And this is coming from a team that runs thousands of tests a day. We run, I'm not going to give away too much, but we run over 1 million a year easily. So, and then lastly, we're going to end up with some takeaways. So interacting like a user. What does this really mean? And before I talk about what that really means, I want to go back to, well, before we start thinking about interacting like a user, let's think about what is the purpose of quality automation. Why are we doing what we're doing? It's not to get a passing test, because that's actually a pretty simple thing to do. It's to have an impact on a product. So here's kind of the quote that I bring to my teams. You can think about this like a mission statement. This is our foundational statement that we use when we ever have a decision. We have to make a decision where we're unclear of, is this the right strategy to take in the automated testing? Well, this is what we fall back to and say, well, does it align with this mission? And here it is. Quality automation practices and processes should seamlessly integrate with an application's development lifecycle, resulting in actionable feedback. They should empower rapid delivery while inspiring confident decision-making. So again, if anybody ever has any questions about, hey, this thing I'm going to change, this is what I'm going to do here, or I'm unsure which pattern I should take when writing these tests, we fall back to this and say, hey, is it going to result in this result? Is it going to empower our development? Is it going to allow us to make rapid decisions? Well, if it doesn't, then maybe we need to reconsider. Okay. So your strategy and your result. So let's take the strategy first here. We're going to talk about DOM selectors. Your DOM selector strategy should be 1, reliable, 2, easily maintained, and 3, interacting with your application like a user does. For instance, this should all lead you to the result of the result of your test should be confidence that your application is working as intended. And does your selector pattern align with that goal? Here's why I think probably most of you are going to say, yeah, absolutely it does. When in reality, I think if you looked a little bit closer, it's probable that it doesn't. Here's the example statement we're going to discuss. On the left-hand side, you'll see our code. It's really simple. We only got 3 elements here. We've got a div, which is a wrapper, with the class name of wrapper, rather. We've got an H1 that has a class name of mb-4, text-4xl, which if you guys use Tailwind, these are very common class names. And it just says checkout. And there's a button that has an ID of buy button and a text of buy on the inside of it. And that's basically the entire component here. So think about, we may be on an e-commerce site and just kind of make this website in your head, kind of picture it. So we're on an e-commerce site. There's this little bitty component that says checkout, has a little button that says buy. You click the buy button, it goes to the buy page. So the test over here says it tests the buy button. It should grab by the class name. It's of mb-4. It's checked that that's visible. Great, because the user needs to be able to see that to know that they're on the checkout page. Okay, then we're going to select the button by the ID. So sci.get buy button dot click. So we've clicked on the buy button. And after we do that, we expect the URL to be thanks. So really simple, really kind of arbitrary test here. Basically what we're checking is that when somebody clicks on the buy button, they are rerouted to the URL of thanks. So again, remember, our code is only 3 elements. Actually, just a wrapper and an H1 and a button. Our test is only 3 lines long. Here's why using that pattern I had on my last test can result in a lot of false confidence. Before I move on to the next piece, what is false confidence? False confidence is my application is working as intended when it's not. And I think that a lot of people in this industry miss out on that point. So I made one change to the code on the left, and I'm going to reveal it to all you guys, but I want to see if anybody notices it. So I'm going to give you guys about 15 seconds to kind of take a look at the screen, take a look at the code, and take a look at the test. And if you see the issue, go ahead and put it in the chat. So I'm going to give 15 seconds, and I'm going to start 15, 20 seconds. So we're going to start right now. Don't think too deeply. It's not a trick question, guys. Okay, 5 seconds. Okay, so we're going to walk through this just like we did the last one, and then I'll reveal what's changed here. So the div with the class of wrapper, H1 that has the same exact styling classes, it says checkout, the button with the ID of buy button, but there's no text. So the button's just a blank button. We removed the 3 characters, BUY, that says buy inside of it. Now, if we go over to our test over here, our test selects by the class name, so it should be visible. Great. It selects by the ID and it clicks it. Great. The URL should include thanks. So what's the problem here? The problem is the user doesn't have any text in the page to click on. The user doesn't know that that button actually exists. The buy button may not even be rendered on the page because it may only exist when there is text inside of it to display. So our test in this case will still pass every single time, but our user cannot click that button. That button may not even display. So here's why I think potentially using IDs, this is going back to the poll earlier. This is why I think potentially using IDs can lead you to a situation of false confidence. We're going to talk about this, a little bit more later on when we start to talk about my rankings. So the solution here. The solution to this, I'll be honest, this is a solution that I came up with. There's probably 150 different solutions out there that are just as viable. So what I want you guys to take away from this is not the Cypress syntax of how I've rewritten this test. I want you to take away the intent here, which is your test should be testing what the user is actually interacting with, what the user is doing, not what the code says, but what the user cares about. So again, same exact code on the left with the missing text inside of it. And it looks like actually for this example, I probably should have bought, actually, no, this example is perfect. So we're right here. So the text on the left-hand side is just the H1 still that has the text of checkout and the button with no text inside of it. But now my test fails because I do sci.contains checkout. I'm searching for the text on the page because that's what the user cares about. The user doesn't care that there's this Tailwind class of mb-4 or text-4xl. And even more than that, those classes could change depending on the viewport that the test is running in. If it's mobile, what if it's text-2xl or text-whatever? The user doesn't care what classes are styling your component. They care that text checkout appears on the page. So moving on, we look at the button. We're no longer selecting by ID. We're selecting by text. So we're getting all of the buttons on the page. And I understand that there's a little bit of a greedy selector issue here. So let's say that there was a page and had 50 buttons on it, like any kind of Amazon checkout page where there's loads of buttons. If we select by button, it's grabbing a lot off the DOM and then it's having to find the one that says by. It could be, a little bit of a performance issue over time. But just stick with me because again, the syntax isn't the point here. It is the takeaway that we should be worried about what our user is interacting with. So I select by the element type of button, and I search for the one that contains the text of by, and then I click it. And then I do the same thing with the URL. The URL should include thanks. Except this time my test fails because the text by doesn't appear on the page. And that's what the user cares about. So before I move on to the actual next step here, where we start to talk about kind of the rankings and some other pieces of this, I just want to hit on it one more time. The user doesn't care what your ID is. The user doesn't care what your class name is. The user doesn't care what the wrapper looks like. It cares that text on the page, the button that they're trying to click on, says the text that they're trying to actually interact with. So think about that when you're writing your tests. Think about, am I validating that this ID exists in this element, or am I validating that the user is going to have the experience that we intend them to have? So I'm going to hop into the rankings and I'm going to disclaim this once again. This is not a roadmap to success. This is what I have found to be viable here. And we're going to start right off with the bottom tier. So by bottom tier, I don't mean worst. I mean, I think these are the ones that basically have the most cost associated with them. And I mean cost in the sense of maintainability, the cost and how much churn they add to your practices, basically the cost in your developer adoption of your testing, the developer adoption of your testing solutions. If your testing solutions are difficult to use, guess who's not going to use them? Your UI devs. They're not going to interact with that. So worrying about your developer experience and choosing your selector patterns is important. So we're going to talk about elements. So I think everybody knows, right off the bat, elements are not a great way to select things unless you're chaining other commands. But I'll read through my definition here and then we'll talk about it a little bit further. So on any other web page or any web page, there are hundreds, if not thousands, if not really tens of thousands of DOM nodes, and they will be repeated. They will not be unique. And selecting the DOM node type that you want typically leads you down the path of basically having to do a greedy selector where you are grabbing, hundreds of DOM nodes and then having to filter through them to find the one that you want. So you can immediately see like that's not really great because we're having to grab way more than we need, then search through this haystack basically for a needle that we're looking for. And again, your user doesn't care about your DOM structure. They do not care. So that's not how your user is interacting with your page. They're not going from HTML body, wrapper going into the this checkout component, and they're going. That's not how they're interacting with it. They're interacting with what is rendered on the screen. The next piece here is class names. So I talked about this a little bit earlier, but class names by design and by design are used for styling and they're meant to be repeated. So class names right off the bat are not unique. They're not meant to be unique. They're also not meant for testing. They're meant for designers and they're meant for applying classes and repeating those classes throughout your application or applying styles and repeating those styles throughout your application. So it removes basically the entire idea that classes are going to be unique. They're not unique. And a user doesn't care. You'll hear me say this a lot throughout these rankings. The user doesn't care what the class names are on the page. So if you interact with it via the class, you're not interacting with that application just like a user would. The last one here is XPath. XPath is the one that I'm going to be pretty firm upon. I think XPath has no place in Cypress testing. I think that there are so many better options outside of XPath that I think XPath really should only exist in if you're using some kind of legacy testing products. That doesn't mean it's bad. That doesn't mean your legacy testing products are bad. But I am saying that if you are a Cypress user, and I'll expand that even to Playwright, but if you're a Cypress user, XPaths really have no business being inside of your testing patterns. Because what they rely upon at their core, XPaths rely upon traversing DOM nodes and traversing it via the node tree. That's not great. So you're now having to go from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next to find the thing that you're looking for. So they're cumbersome. They're flaky because our UI can change all the time depending upon when data loads in, if your application is asking for new data or not. So think about it like your refrigerator, guys. When you go into your refrigerator and you try and grab for, and I'm going to use a common thing that loads of households have, like there's milk or tea in your refrigerator. It's in the pitcher. It's sitting in the same spot. You go in to grab it, and then you come back a couple hours later, and your kids or your wife or whoever your roommates have been in the refrigerator getting their stuff, moving things around. It's not where you left it, right? That's essentially the same thing that happens with your web page. That XPath that you wrote for that moment in time, it represents where that DOM or where that element was in your application or was in your page. by the time you run your tests again, it's likely to have changed. So setting off out of the bat by using an XPath, you're setting yourself up for a high maintenance load, a bad developer experience, and a basically a world of pain when it comes down to refactoring your application and refactoring how things work. I know it can be really, really easy to go through and just kind of right click in developer tools and say like select XPath and copy and paste that into Cypress. I'm going to really encourage you to never use XPath instead of Cypress. So I think I've buried XPath at this point. So we're going to move on to the next tier. So middle tier. This is where I tend to differ in my ideology from the Cypress documentation a little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit. But that's with data attribute selectors. So I did data dash star here because Cypress recommends data dash CY, and that's totally fine and totally a valid way to approach things. I think you can maybe, it depends on what other testing tools you're using, get a little bit more utility out of data dash test ID. And I'll talk about that here in a little bit. But I'm going to read through my description here. But think about any e-commerce site, like the example we just had. Does a user know that when they're clicking on the add to cart button, that the button has a test ID attribute set to add to cart button? Or do they know that when they click a button that contains the text add to cart, is that what they are expecting? I think it's probably the latter. I don't think they care about the data test ID. I think they care that it says add to cart. So I think that right there is one problem with data attributes. A really good pro for data attributes is that you can go directly to the element that you're looking for. But I think a really big con to them is that they're easy and they force you to not interact with like a user does. You can get around this and by chaining other selectors, like we did earlier, you can select something by its element type or by its data attribute, and then chaining another assertion like it contains, a particular type of text. But I think a lot of people don't do that chaining, and that's where we lose out. We lose out on the interacting like a user. So Git as well. Git, I think, is one of those where Cypress gives you enough to be dangerous to yourself sometimes, right? So using Git, it can be abused in lots of ways where you are grabbing way too much or way too little, or you're trying to, get by an attribute that was never intended for you to use. Let's think about like an input field, or a name attribute on that. It may be something that was never intended for you to use with testing. Therefore, it can change at any time, and it doesn't have any intrinsic relationship or implicit connection to the test itself. Same thing with ID here. So ID, the pros of it, it's really unique. It is less frequently changed. The cons is it has no implicit connection to the test, and it's not what the user interacts with. So your developer is going to go in one day and they're going to change that ID, they're going to push their code up, and their pipeline's going to fail. Well, that's because they did not know that that ID was tied to a test. If we're using something like data test ID or data sci, the pro for that is, yeah, the developer should know that that attribute is tied to a test. So if they change that, they need to go and update the corresponding test appropriately. Whereas this way, I think IDs, like I said, the pros are they're unique and they're less frequently changed, but the cons are, I think they can end up with developer churn. I think what happens is a dev can go in and change that ID, shoot it up to the pipeline runs, and say half an hour later they get the results, and now they realize they forgot to update a test. They have to update a test and rerun their entire pipeline. So that can be a really frustrating experience. And if you think about, small development teams, that's not so bad. Big development teams, that compounds incredibly quickly. Okay, top tier. So Cypress testing library is one that I think that everybody in this conference today should be looking up and looking at, considering, playing with. Even if you can't implement it at your place of work, you can. So we're going to talk about that too. Cypress testing library forces you to query for DOM nodes the same way your user finds them. This makes your tests act more like a user and provides you with more confidence and maintainability when a refactor occurs. Additionally, the library enforces accessibility rules and therefore enforces accessible UI code. So I know if anybody was in the talk with the Axe Core folks earlier from DQ, this is not, I'm not talking about that kind of accessibility. I'm talking about basically semantic HTML. But the really cool thing about Cypress testing library is it has selectors like find by place ID or find by role. Or, those are the kind of things where if you're finding by a role, you can say find by role button or find by role header level 1 or header level 2. Or if you're finding, like I said, finding by placeholder, it's going to enforce that when that placeholder actually exists and when the developer refactors your test is not dependent upon a attribute or a class name or a ID. It's not dependent upon any of that. It's dependent upon what the user is actually interacting with, which is the placeholder text inside of that input field. So Cypress Testing Lib is a third-party library. You can download it and bring it in. Really cool thing about Cypress, right, is that it's extensible. But if you work at a place where they won't allow you to pull Cypress Testing Library into your application and into your processes, well, you can basically just read through those source docs and recreate it locally. It's not all that hard. They're basically just writing custom selectors and writing them in a way that you probably haven't thought about before. So you can go through and look at the testing library source code and basically say like, yeah, I actually only need these three selectors to really improve my workflow here, and then write those inside of your own code at your place of work. So it's not difficult to kind of make things better for everybody in your organization. The next piece here is test attribute. So I know we'll go hop back here. Remember I talked about data sci being or data dash test ID or data dash sci being middle tier. I also think it can be top tier. I think it can be top tier if you do things the right way. I think it can be top tier because it takes you right to the element you're looking for. I think it can be top tier because you've now isolated the DOM node that you want, and you can use things like within or contains or find to allow you to drill down and get the more specificity or get to the exact thing that you're looking for. Anybody who's ever worked with, like iframes or anything like that inside of Cypress, it's really difficult to get to the stuff you're looking for sometimes inside of an iframe. So by grabbing it, something like an iframe wrapper by a test attribute and then diving into it with those change commands, I think it can be a really, really nice selector here. You just have to be disciplined enough to use it. So the last one left up for a question mark, and this is because, as I said earlier, this isn't a roadmap. This isn't a solution to any kind of selector problems here. What this is what I have found to be viable and valuable to my developers, to my software engineering team or SDETs on my team, to my organization. So what works for you? Consider your application, consider your users, and what strategy makes sense for your team to have the impact that you want on your product. So my selector patterns may not be the thing that you're going to say like, yeah, this actually makes sense. Well, what if your application is, and I'm going to use an arbitrary example, what if your application is relatively static? You don't actually need to worry about, the DOM changing all that often. Then maybe XPaths are viable for you, and you don't need to take on the overhead of adding, test attributes or things like that. Maybe you're a one developer show on your application and you don't have the time to go through and use some more complex testing patterns here. Okay, well then what works for you? Consider that. um, I just think that everybody that should be thinking about this and what works for you should also work for your user. So it doesn't really matter what selector pattern you use here as long as it's maintainable, reliable, and interacting with your application the same way that the user does. So takeaways, I just hit this, but I'll do it one more time here. Your DOM selector strategy should be reliable, easily maintained, interacting with the user. The results of your test should be confidence your application is working. Okay, again, if you ever have any questions about what you're doing, I think this is not just applicable to my team. I feel like this is applicable to lots of teams here. I chose these words very intentionally, and I know I'm getting a little bit close on time, so I will not rush through this one, but I won't spend a ton of time going through every single word. But when I say quality automation practices should be seamlessly integrated with an application's development lifecycle, I mean, we should be operating in a CI/CD world. The days of overnight test runs resulting in like an HTML report, and you review those in the morning, those need to go away. And I know that's not really a Cypress topic, but I think that that's when I believe where quality automation should sit inside of an application's development lifecycle. It needs to be seamlessly integrated, meaning your developers shouldn't even know it exists when they are using when they're writing new code and pushing stuff up and submitting merge requests, pull requests, whatever it is. That should kick off an action that runs your test. If it runs your test, it should give them feedback. That feedback should be actionable, which means it shouldn't be vague. They shouldn't wonder why a test failed. So your test should be good enough to give them this feedback in a manner that allows them to consume it, understand it, and act upon it. If they have to spend their whole day thinking about, well, why did this test fail? Like it doesn't fail locally, it only fails here. That's a problem. And we need to do better than that. They should empower rapid delivery while inspiring confident decision making. So rapid delivery, meaning if you want to go to market 10 times a day, go to market. By go to market, I mean go to production. So if you want to go to production 10 times a day, your test processes should empower that, should not hold it back. So your test runs shouldn't take 2, 3, 4 hours. They should be faster than that. And they should be able to result in actionable feedback that inspires confident decision making. So it's a go, no go decision. Well, really, your pipeline should make that decision for you. I think in an ideal world, we all live in a place where we write our tests, developers submit a pull request or a merge request, whatever it is. It kicks off a pipeline, runs those tests, and the result of those tests determine whether that code is moving forward or not. So thank you all so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate you coming to this talk. It's something that I am passionate about, and I'm happy to talk with any of you all at great lengths about this. So if you want to reach out on any of my socials, you can check out my website up there. It's a little bit outdated at this point, but I just haven't had time to post a new blog topic. Thank you so much again. I really appreciate it.